Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Enterprise Alchemy. As always, I'm Ant. Today, I'm joined by Marcus Ooi, General Manager of Innovation, I believe, for the Lottery Corporation in Australia.
Yeah, that's right, Anthony. So, it's actually a technology. It's planning, architecture, and delivery. Got a whole bunch of things in that technology space, but that's all good.
My apologies, I messed it up.
Good, man. No problems at all.
So it's great to have a fellow Aussie on the podcast representing Down Under. So, Marcus, we get straight into it. I know there's lots of stuff you've sort of been involved in, but there's some pieces that you're passionate about specifically, which really transcend the things you're doing functionally. So one of the things we talked about being brilliantly authentic. What is that from your point of view? What are we talking about there?
Yeah, well, I think it's really a situation that I think it's just come up through learnings in academia, but also through the workplace, and sort of blending workplace, family, and academia together. Right. So I think it's a situation. It's all about being genuine, being true to yourself, having a clear purpose around what's really important to you, always upholding what's really important to you, and also I think in a situation where a lot of workplaces, there's just so many factors. There's politics. There's all these things that are beyond your control. I think where there's situations where you can control, what's important to you, what your values are, and just being real with people. I think it's really refreshing organizational context at times.
Yeah, okay. So let's dig into this. So this is an interesting thing, right? And I suppose it's almost like go to, don't want to turn it into a philosophical discussion, but, almost like kind of stoic philosophy, I suppose. It's, controlling the things you can control, understanding the things you can't control, and getting to peace with that, but then really bringing your authentic self, right? And so I think it's like an overused word, as in people think, God, this is more kind of HR fluff. But it's actually way more than that, I think, right? It's super important. Here's the question I'd ask for you is, do you see that connection to authenticity and being authentic and others being authentic with you? What role do you think that plays in shaping trust?
Huge role. Well, I think particularly as leaders, and we're all leaders in different ways, and it doesn't have to relate to hierarchy either.
Yeah,
you can be a situation where we just set a tone and you be a leader in different situations. So for me, it's all about setting trust. So being authentic, being who you are. So people build that trust. So if you are who you are, you do what you say you're going to do. You're very clear about that. I think it also, as a leader, you have the opportunity to set that example as well, and show that vulnerability and show that, hey, we're human, we make mistakes, these things happen.
Yeah.
I was just on the phone to one of my ex-workmates who was really fearful of she'd made some mistakes, and sort of said, look, we're all human, these things happen, but as long as you're open and honest about it, and we talk through situations like that, it's a good situation. And as a leader, that you can actually show, hey, I'm human, I make mistakes, but I'll be open and honest about it, and we'll work through these things together. So I think it creates a bit of a safe space as well, and that involves trust, that involves a license to make a mistake, have a go, try something different, and bring what's unique to each one of us as well, because we've always got a slightly different vantage point.
Yeah. Okay. So following this thread, then, so it sounds like, there's, and this is certainly something I think the research would agree with, that, there's, I suppose the psychology research I've seen, that if you are authentic, let's say, you then show others that it's your role modeling that behavior. So you show others that it's okay to do that. And then you're creating those conditions of, like psychological safety, if you like, for people to say, okay, well, if they're themselves, then I can be myself, and everybody kind of relaxes into that a little bit. But that's something that I've seen even my career, right? So I've been in the workforce now, I don't know, 24 years. So I'm sort of mid-career, I suppose. Even in that time, the change from leaders being expected to have all the answers to actually being good at asking questions, right? So, I'd like what's your perspective on what I suppose what I'm trying to understand or think about is why do leaders feel like they need to have all the answers in the first place, right? Is it, what have you seen? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a really interesting one, Anthony, because I think it comes from a position of fear. So being
Like,
shown up as it actually being shown up as not being the smartest person in the room. Like, how dare you show up and not be the smartest person in the room and not have the answer to every single question? But if you actually dissect that a little bit and you think about it, well, the opposite, if that does happen, it actually makes you question, how can this person know every single fact about every single widget and every single topic? And I just don't think it's true, right? So and what that, the opposite helps by exposing the fact that, hey, I don't know the answer to certain questions. I'm not an expert. I don't have vertical depth in every single thing. But
yeah,
hey, I know people that are, and they happen
yeah,
to be sitting next to me, and
yeah,
they know
yeah,
more than me. I think it's also a humbling thing, and it brings that human element to it. And the fact
right.
that you can actually expose them, be almost like having those flaws and saying, hey, I don't know about this particular topic, but I'm aware of that and I recognize my strengths and weaknesses and I can call upon other people. I think it's a powerful thing, but it's also empowering others as well.
Yeah.
There's a reason for other people being influenced.
Yeah, so this was going to actually what you're saying, and as I was kind of thinking that through, I'm like, I think you're so right here, and it's something that I've been thinking a lot about. There's millions of models of mental kind of mindset stuff right out there, but one that really sticks with me a lot is kind of like, well, are we a fear mindset or a growth mindset, right? And so one of the things that you just mentioned, and I hadn't necessarily, I don't think, made that explicit mental connection myself. But I don't know. Here's how about I posit something and you see what you think. All right.
Yeah.
Is that we're afraid of not knowing, as you said, because then that'll expose us, right? And we're like, oh shit, I don't have the answer. But in actual fact, the worst thing you can do in that situation then is bluff it, because ultimately, like, the goal is to solve whatever problem's in front of you. And you're like, so I got to do whatever I need to do to get to that answer, because even if it's just for myself, it's going to conquer that fear because I'm going to get something done. I'm going to achieve something. And actually, strangely enough, the best way to conquer fear is to get the answer. Therefore, I posit that the best way is to say, I don't know. It's not my thing. And in a way, I found as a leader, it's really cathartic, because you're like, look, I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm not good at. So,
Totally.
and often, like, people come to me and they go, Ant, what are we doing on this? And what do you think about that? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I know how we'd find out, but as we sit here right now, I don't know. And then it's kind of like, okay, cool. So next question, how do we find the answers, and how do we then get those right people in the room to answer? And it's freeing, because then you're like, I don't know. So who are we looking for? Right. And then you can go find those people and get those answers. And then you just go one step closer to actually finding the solution to your problem. So I don't know, what, in terms of a concept, like, what do you think about that?
I think it's absolutely right. As you were talking through that, Anthony, I was sort of thinking about it actually applies at a very early age. So the
Yeah.
example would be
Yeah.
and I was just trying to put my son to sleep, and he doesn't sleep particularly well, so he's super energetic. But sometimes I see him get into a position where he might tell a little lie in a particular situation and say he knows something about something, but he doesn't, a
Yep.
particular topic. And I can see him starting to dig a hole,
Yep.
and he'll dig it, and it'll
Yep.
get deeper, and it'll get deeper, and then he'll turn to me with just a completely puzzled look and thinking to himself, how am I going to get out of this? So I think he's starting to learn about, how do you turn to others when you need it, and actually
Yeah.
calling out for help. And I think it just makes perfect sense that the person who's the expert on a particular topic, call on them. It's just so powerful, right? And so it's impossible to know. Again, it's impossible to have depth of knowledge in breadths of areas. Whereas if you know who to turn to solve the problem,
Yeah.
it's really powerful as well.
Yeah, so it's interesting you mentioned that. My eldest, I've got three boys. My eldest was like that. a lot as well. Oh, I know this. And
Yeah.
sometimes you sort of stray into areas where I know a lot about. I've spent my life kind of working on. So I'd be like, no, that's not correct, man. Oh, yes. And like you say, it'll be like a bit. And then I'm like, okay, you're going deeper and deeper and deeper here. But the interesting thing, and this is something I think I had to learn through like bitter experience, like getting it wrong, right? Because being somebody who has ideas and what you like to think, oh, I can do it better. I can, I can solve these challenges. But it's almost like within yourself, you have to sort of come to a sort of centeredness, if you like, and saying it's okay that I don't know everything. That's not attached to my ego. And also admitting I don't know or admitting I'm wrong is not a character flaw or not something that I need to beat myself up about. In fact, once you let all that stuff go, you can stop worrying about it. Like, it's strange that this has kind of evolved in this way, because I suppose if you think, to me, I like to think a lot about just fundamental human behavior, how we work together in groups. And you're like, there's a reason we're a social species, because
totally.
we worked out a long, long time ago that like we can't achieve as much on our own as what we can achieve together with groups of people. And then we started assembling ever larger groups of people because we realized that, hey, that's more effective. So it's one of those things is like, well, the people are there. If you're all going in the same direction, you don't need to carry all the load. And in fact, as well, people get something out of you deferring to them and saying, well, you know what I mean? Recognizing their expertise rather than trying to go over the top of them.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you touched on a really important point there is actually making that mistake. It's a painful thing to do. And no one wants to be shown up as not succeeding at something that really means something to them. But also in the situation where I think the failure is necessary to learn.
Yeah.
So if you're in that situation, if I take that example of my son, if he starts digging himself this hole and he tells little white lies, and then you've got a situation where everyone in the room doesn't pick up on it and he gets away with it, he'll take it the next time, he'll take it further the next time. But if it's a situation where you don't experience that failure, there's no trigger of shock, there's no trigger of like the resistance that pushes against you to actually create a need to change that behavior and do things differently. So I think that's another thing that's really important, because if you get away with it, there's no need to change. If you get celebrated for, about telling that lie and not being real and being genuine,
that's true.
then you'll take it further and actually go, hey, that's a positive behavior. And then again, if I take it back to like that sort of early kids behavior, you get the lolly. Then you get a bag of lollies, and then get a show bag of lollies, and then it goes further and further. So I think it's a behavior, and I don't think it necessarily changes. Like, that's still applicable, even when it comes to a boardroom, even when it comes to executive teams, when you're a consultant and you're consulting to customers. If you find yourself in a situation and you don't pick up on it, but you've made a mistake and there's a trigger to change, then you're not able to have awareness that you need to change.
Yeah, that is so true. And this, I know we're going slightly sideways on this, but I'm really super interested in this, because it sounds like we both thought about this same type of thing. Is that those, like, that pain, right? Those painful things where you experience that, and it's a real visceral thing, right? We all know it when we're like, oh shit, I'm out of my depth, or I've done the wrong thing, or I've made that mistake. You feel it in the pit of your stomach. It's like a real, oh God, a real uncomfortable feeling. But the pain is necessary. And so this is where as well, I'm sort of like, those experiences, that pain, that discomfort, right, removing that from people entirely is a terrible idea, because like the way you put it, I love that, is that's the resistance that's pushing back on you, and you need to feel that, because as you feel that resistance, then you're like, okay, well, if I'm getting this resistance working in this group or being part of this group, then I'm not playing my optimal role. Something's wrong here. Something's not right. And so sometimes you need to feel the pain to grow, I think.
So absolutely. I think when there is failure, you do feel the pain. You also bank that in your memory as well. So you have that trigger where your mind's thinking, you see a situation, and hopefully, if it's a similar situation, you can kind of pick up on those signs that you're going to be put in a situation where you failed at before, and you can prepare accordingly. And it also builds into, I think it builds into your muscle memory. So So it's a situation you feel the situation, you feel a build up, and you can kind of get the signs as to, and you almost act intuitively because you've felt that pain before. So I think a combination of those things help us as unique human beings just to react in a different way and learn and do things differently.
Yeah, and it seems like you said, I suppose, that there's a couple of things to me that then follow on. And I know, as you've mentioned these, right? So I'll sort of pick them up again. But I think, this is purely my hypothesis here. I don't know any research or anything that I'm referring to. But people can sense when you're that authentic, when you're in that state of just being you. Right. And
Yep.
there's no pretense. There's no, it's just, okay, let's look at the problem or whatever it is we need to do. And let's decide how we're going to do it, and we're all going to play different roles. And if my role is the leader, then, I need to help as best I can so that you don't have crap that you're dealing with that's hindering you. But in terms of your ability then to lead, to motivate, to build connections with other humans, I found it's like if you come from that place, people can almost sense it. So I think where some of this comes from, right, is this idea of, compassion, and a sort of a research-based idea, I suppose, compassion competence. And everyone knows what compassion is, I think, which is, thinks they know, but I think often if you boiled it down, they would say being nice to people, and it's in actual fact, it's not. It's being diplomatically supportive and honest with people when you need to be. So the reason I bring that in is I think, and this is something you talked about, like being truthful with people, and that doesn't mean you have to be a jerk to people, and you can be sensitive to them and everything else. But I think sometimes it is actually important in those group dynamics to introduce that resistance to people before they climb too far. Right, because then it's very difficult because of the power dynamics, I think, in companies. And, it's very, very hard to call out your boss or somebody 2 levels above you and say, no, I don't think so. That's completely wrong. But then at the same time, that they're headed for a brick wall and everybody can see it coming, right? But nobody's going to say anything. So I think you're really onto something with that whole, the resistance is good. Resistance gives it's feedback.
Absolutely. And I think it comes down to intent. So if the intent is to help someone, the intent is to really help them learn. If you see them heading towards a brick wall, or how do you pivot them? How do you guide them in a way that helps them as an individual?
Yeah.
Generally, it's a tailored approach that doesn't involve public roasting of any kind. It might be a situation where you pull them aside. Maybe it could even be outside of the building over a coffee and relaying the feedback in a very constructive way, because it is a learning exercise. It's an exercise, but it also helps to build trust, because hopefully if you've got that right intent, you go into it to help someone, help them learn, help to improve a particular situation. That's where it really starts. And that intent needs to come down to yourself being real in the first place and being genuine from that really, that purpose of trying to help. Now, the second thing is like, the converse is also true. So I think in a lot of organizations, we do see the old corporate ladder. You sort of, I suppose I can say that now, sort of, I'm similar to you, Anthony. I think I'm 24 years in a professional career. It's pretty scary when you talk about it in those number of years.
I know, because time's just vanished, right? You're like, all the things I'm going to do when I'm 40, and then you go,
yeah, I used to be one of those young guys that said, those old guys, they don't come to Friday night drinks, all that sort of stuff. And now it's all a bit different these days. But what I do think is that when it does come to that corporate ladder, it is a situation where it can get a bit Teflon when you get to those higher levels, and the conversations can become a lot slicker where nothing really sticks. And that is a challenge, right? There's no better example. That might be the most successful salespeople, the most successful, and everything's sort of, really schmick, and there's no holes in everything. And again, the opposite of what we talked about to start with, where everything is perfect. What could possibly go wrong, Anthony? Just trust me. I know everything. Nothing could possibly ever go wrong. And I think that breeds a situation. It is a difficult situation, and particularly in those leadership roles when you don't have that that sense of being real and sense of a true purpose, a sense of what a person is. It just becomes a bit more of a scripted kind of Teflon exercise, for need of a better term.
Yeah, well, I can't speak. I can only speak for myself, really, in my own experiences. Whenever I've encountered people like that, I'm like, I wouldn't trust you as far as I can throw you,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
what you're telling me, as someone who, I think I'm reasonably good at critical thinking. I'm like, this doesn't add up. This cannot be right, because there's, like you said, know all these things, everything's going to go fine. And you said no one in the history of the world ever who actually tried to implement one of these things. So
absolutely.
can we just be real about where the risks are? Just saying, look, this is what we're assuming. These are the risks. Look, we think based on the best of our knowledge today, and this is another thing I found often people, and it's the higher they get, reticent to do, which is almost, the example you gave with your son, doing that on a much bigger scale, is if what they said at first was wrong. So there's new information that comes to light that says, actually, we made a lot of hidden assumptions here that we didn't realize we made. And those things are actually going to derail this whole thing, or they're critical, and we need to address that. Therefore, we may not need to stop this entirely, but we do need to change tack and pivot slightly. And it's almost that whole sunk cost fallacy. Once people are in, and then they keep digging, and you're like, the only place you're going to dig, you know what I mean? If you keep going, is into the center of the earth, and you're going to incinerate yourself and everyone else. But yeah,
Absolutely.
people seem to want to do that. So I think it's almost a duty, if you like, to your fellow man or woman, fellow human, to say, yeah, like you said, be respectful. There's public roastings, I think, are just, they're no good for anyone. That says more about the person giving the roasting, I think. But things that are, like you say, done sensitively, respectfully, I think it's absolutely important that people don't shy away from that. And so that's when I think almost like that truth and authenticity, like saying what you see, those things, to my mind at least, I suppose, coalesce together.
Absolutely. You mentioned a point where you find that situation where you don't trust that person as far as you can throw them. That's a really interesting one, because going back, connecting that to another concept we just talked about, that gives you a particular feeling in your gut. And you also, again, go back to this whole muscle memory thing, that your brain memory, your muscle memory thing, but you apply that to an individual. Now that's in your memory bank. Now I never want to deal with that person ever again. I don't want to deal with any of those people that they're acquaintances with. There's other people in the same company, the same style, same social group. I don't deal with any of those people. So it's almost like tarnishing that whole group of people. Mm-hmm. And it's baked into your muscle memory, it's baked into your brain memory, it's baked into your gut. And so then it becomes like a people thing as well, Anthony, which takes it even further. And the consequences are huge.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I've had this experience, and this is where I think, for another time, but I've got some views, I think, on how sales and relationship building could be completely remodeled to more accurately reflect social dynamics and how we actually build relationships naturally, right, as people. But that's one of the things I've always been really wary of. And even though I used to work in sales, right, and now I look back and I say, oh shit, I wouldn't have bought anything from me.
Absolutely.
Because the way they're trained, as a big part of it, and the culture and it's a bit of a bro, even if they're, like men and women working in there, it's still that, bro culture, get the money, blah, blah, blah. But the problem is, once you get to a certain level of seniority, you're like, I've seen all this before. Every trick in the book you're going to pull, I've seen that trick before. So why don't you just talk to me like a human being, help me understand the problem you solve. We can talk about whether that's a problem that I need to solve. And then if there's a match, fantastic. If there's not, then great, we move on. And what that, but like you say, it's almost like then every time I kind of get a sales approach, I'm like, oh, do I really have to do this? Because of the bad experiences I've had in the past, it makes me nervous.
Absolutely. Well, it also relates to, I think there's also what you just mentioned, there's nothing unique in that scenario. So there's nothing that particular sales example or salesperson brings that they're just mimicking everyone around them. They're modeling someone who's done something, literally like trying to copy paste their own behaviors. And there's nothing unique about that. It doesn't go into a lens of how can I solve a problem, how can I help this other person, which is where the intent really should be coming from. So yeah, I know exactly what you mean in that scenario. Yeah, I worked in sales as well, and I've also fallen into that trap in earlier days, and it's just mimicking someone who you're not, and then you
Right.
get into a
Yeah,
trap
yeah.
of like,
Because
but
they're
it
like,
feels really foreign as well. So for the individual that's doing it, then you almost feel like you're talking differently. You feel like you're using words you would never use. You're hanging out in places you would never hang out. You're hanging out with people talking about topics you would never talk about. Just doesn't float your boat at all. And then what happens is like your shoulders get all stiff, and then you're all like can't relax. You're not having fun, and then you kind of realize, hey, I'm wasting time here, right?
yeah.
Time's really, really precious and really important.
Yeah, and I look back on it now and I just think, because a lot of where I learn stuff here in Europe, and a lot of it's imported sales stuff from the US, and it was a very much like, well, this guy closed X million of deals, and often those people are horrible people. And it's like, yeah, they did, but they can't build relationships with people, right? They can't get anything further because, often they've got like pathological personalities. So it's like, well, look, that person, is a narcissist, but potentially is a sociopath. So, because you often look at, and I sort of thought this was curious. I worked in a sales environment with lots of people, and the real top performing people, I'm like, these are, if you took them to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, they would say, yeah, these are pathological people. And you look at the way they treat people in their own personal relationships, and it's often that those people are disposable.
Yeah, I was just, yeah, absolutely. And I was just, sorry, I didn't cut you off. I was just
No,
going to,
go on.
I'm glad you touched on the family point, because then that person needs to go home at night to their family, and like, do they just flick a switch and become a totally different person? Can you trust that? Yeah, totally crazy.
Yeah, right. And I always wondered, like, what's the problem, going to somebody and saying, look, this might work, it might not. We know it's worked in other places, but that's because they have this sort of set of problems. So if you don't have those set of problems, then, you may well be better off looking at something else. But if you do, then yeah, we can, talk about how those problems are manifesting for yourself, and then how we can help. And it is almost, you talked before about the fear mindset. I think it's the same thing, actually. Now I think about it, they're afraid they're going to lose the deal. They're afraid that anything they say like that, the customer might say no, but then the implicit assumption they're making, perhaps, and that you don't realize, and I've done this before as well, is that by not mentioning those things, that people are going to say yes. And it's not true at all. It's not as if you've got some Jedi mind control powers, that says these are not the droids you were looking for, and they go, oh, okay, yeah, fair enough. It's crazy the things we convince ourselves of.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think when it comes to fear, once you, like, no one wants to, you wouldn't knowingly go and, jump into it, jump into the ocean, shark infested waters or any of that sort of stuff. But I think if you do have a certain level of fear and you face into it and you conquer it, it's just so rewarding as well. And I think that adds to your toolkit. It just floats your boat, and it's a real sense of achievement. Again, the exact opposite of that whole Teflon deal that we just talked about.
You're right. So I didn't realize the kind of dopamine effect, right, that you can create by saying, well, I acknowledge my fear. Everybody's afraid. Right. And I've heard soldiers talk about this, in other podcasts and stuff. And they're saying, oh, you're in the special forces or whatever. How are you not afraid to go into a gunfight? And they're like, oh, of course I'm afraid. Everybody's afraid. Like, if you weren't afraid, there's something wrong, and then your guard would be down, and then, you're likely to get killed. So it's not, you're a boxer, you step into the ring. Are you afraid? Yeah, of course. But so everyone's afraid. And so I think like that's a real important first step, is that acknowledging it, that's okay. Everyone's afraid. That's what happens. We're human beings. It's just that we can't, like I can't transplant my brain or transplant myself and put it in your head, you know what I mean? And vice versa. So we don't see that in other humans, but it's like we're all feeling these feelings. So it's not about whether you feel the feeling, it's then about what you do with that, and saying, okay, well, and that's where I think is, or at least what helps for me is to rationalize things and say, okay, well, yeah, I'm really scared about that. and like, okay, what's the outcome? Okay, this could be really bad. Okay, so what do I need to do to make sure that doesn't happen? And then I've just got to focus on getting up every day and performing those activities and being open to listen. So if I'm off course, I need to know, and then it's almost like you sort of, I don't know, I've thought about this a bit. You take the burden off yourself and you
Yeah.
make yourself mentally kind of subservient to your goal. And
Yes.
what I mean by that is to say, well, it's no longer about me. It's no longer about how, my ego or any of those things. The only thing that matters is that this is where we're going. And so I'll do whatever I have to do, and I'm going to get other people, and we all do whatever we have to do. And then that creates, I think, that environment of saying, well, I'm no better than the next person. Even if I'm theoretically in charge, it's a team effort. And also then when you learn to rely on other people and you can rely on them, it creates this like such a kick when you go, man, how scary was that? And we did it, So, and obviously some people do crazy extreme stuff, to get that, oh, I jumped out of a plane in a wingsuit or something, you know what I mean? And it's like, okay, you can go do that. That's fine. I'm not that extreme. But to get that same hit of saying, ooh, that was close and we did it, and then you feel like you've really achieved something. And especially when other people come along with you and you do it together, then it's like, we all value each other because we're all got different parts to play. And that's the magic. The magic is not about us. It's about, like, as individuals and what we think, it's about how we show up every day for each other in service to a greater goal.
Absolutely. That greater goal is really important, the greater purpose, what we strive for. And generally, if you're sharing it with others, it's connected to family, it's connected to whatever it might be. It's a greater purpose, greater than just myself as an individual in a particular moment to do a micro task. It's got to be something bigger than that. And that really drives us, because the analogy then, Anthony, would be where there's a team sport. What's more fun, an individual sport where you're absolutely dominating your opponent and it's just over in the first minute? Or is there more satisfaction out of the 1-point win in a team sport? Buzzer beater. Absolutely. Everyone's just jumping all over each other. The crowd goes nuts. Memory will last a lifetime, all that sort of stuff. So I think there's a lot of power in sharing with others. And also I think there's a lot of power in seeing others be successful too, right? And just having a little part to play in it. Even if it's a coach, even if it's a teammate, you make that pass and someone hits the game-winning basket. Greatest thing in the world.
Yeah. Right. And so this is something I've heard a little bit, and really Josephine from BA, shout out because you put this concept in my head. But the idea of putting the ladder down for others, and it's almost like once you're comfortable with your own self and your own ego and all the rest of it, then you can start to say, yeah, come up by all means. How can I help? And it's like by doing that others will lift you up. So it's I know this is going to sound really obvious, and it goes back to like ancient observed wisdom, right? The starts of kind of civilizations, but it's saying you have to give in order to receive. And it's like that's the way humans work, because we're a social species. So, and there's something really I find cathartic about being in service to something greater than myself. And because like you said with the teammates, let's say, I was never going to be quick on the rugby pitch. I'm just too big and too slow. But there's plenty of, but what I can do is go, okay, well, we'll get field position, or we'll make some, some meters, and then we'll give it to the guys who really can run, and they can go score the tries. And it's like, or the great kickers who can then slot the field goals. And it's like nothing better than that feeling. And it's like also you so respect each other, because they can't make the necessarily grind up the field and make the meters because they're not big enough. But then you can't do what they do. So you're all like, hey, we're all playing a position here in service to something greater. And I think there's something really special in that.
Totally. It's also playing to each other's strengths.
Yeah.
And also the example you just walked us through is recognizing where the weaknesses are and being real about it. It's knowing where you can, how you can, rely on others, and making that call and having the trust in other people and teammates is critical. But it's also a situation where I think as you sort of go along with your career, it does become a lot about legacy. And
Yeah,
I don't know
yeah,
about yourself,
yeah, yeah,
Anthony, like
yeah.
there is a tipping point where you go from young to old.
I know.
And at
When did that
some
happen?
point, I think it happened when you stop binge drinking, I believe, is about that point
Ah,
in time. You
never.
know, when you have to go and see the doctors for annual checkups and all that sort of stuff.
Right, yeah,
But I
when
think
they're
it's
like, mate, you keep doing that, you're going to be dead in 2 years. You're like, oh,
yeah,
shit,
yeah,
okay. And those
yeah,
things where they're like, you don't have to worry about that screening before, but now, yeah, we need to see you regularly. You're like, oh, okay, I'm one of those guys now. Okay.
absolutely. It's when the recovery is really slow, right? It's like,
Yeah,
whack. But I think there's a tipping point when it comes to legacy. I think when earlier in our careers, it's a theory. It's
yeah,
something you put out there. You go, you know, when you get really old, you don't want to leave a legacy behind. And then it's that situation where it's just slowly you build up your career and you know, set yourself goals and hopefully you meet some or most of those goals along the way. And you build yourself up to a certain point where it's less about being really self conscious and worrying what people think about things and just actually going for it and being, you know, being comfortable in your own skin, being comfortable in being different, being comfortable in being unique, and bringing something different that makes you, quite frankly, brilliant relative to others, because it's not about pure academics. Academics might be a particular score, knowledge about a specific topic. You could read 20 books on that topic and you're a guru and that's it kind of thing. But what makes us different and what makes us unique are those other things. And in doing so, that legacy, again, it's a tipping point where you kind of take a step and go, hey, you know, I really want to help other people. I think it's probably, Anthony, it's probably connected to family and, you know, having kids and sort of seeing that whole Lion
yeah.
King circle of life thing going.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the tipping point was when I started wearing my Crocs to the local supermarket.
Yeah.
And then my wife's like, I can't do this anymore. This is just, you've gone like sunk, you know what I mean? But what my kids told me though is that I didn't know this. It's obviously something they see on the YouTube shorts or something. But apparently you've got two modes with the Crocs. You've got economy mode, where if you've got the back strap done over the front, it's in economy mode. If the back strap's at the back, it's in sport mode. So they're
You
like,
can
look, as
still
long as you're
sprint.
in, that's it.
You
So
can
they're
still
like, Dad,
sprint
as long
for
as
that,
you're
yeah.
ready at any moment, you're in sport mode, you can wear the Crocs. But yeah, I think it is also, I found, to start to get a real kick, like you start to accumulate wisdom, you know, which is like, hey, I tried doing this stuff and I screwed it up sometimes and I got it right sometimes. And here are the things I've learned. And you can really help shortcut things, I think, for people, and also provide them with, you know, relevant and insightful feedback. As in saying, I know where you are. I've been there. I totally get it. I get, you know what I mean? But like, here's the things that I realized later on about that. And then, you know, for those people who are able to take that on, it can just help them get ahead so much quicker.
Absolutely. And it's all kind of contextual, and the human element adds so much. So that's where mentoring,
Mm-hmm.
coaching, buddies, all those structures really help, because knowing that context, you know, if you pick up a book, it's not contextualized for your particular situation at that point in time for that particular problem or situation that you might find yourself in. Whereas if you're surrounded by people that can see, that can feel, that can think, that know your history, know your context, know enough about the situation, know how to give you the message in the most efficient way that it'll sink in and be practical for you, and know where it's coming from a really kind intent. I think that's so powerful. And also going back to the whole thing where, you know, I think everyone's getting so impatient these days. We talk about the
Yeah,
attention
yeah.
span, right? And like I used to stand up and walk out of university lecture halls. But nowadays it's like you can't grab someone's attention within a 3-second YouTube shot. Someone will, you know, swipe sideways onto the next thing.
I feel you, man. I was just thinking the same thing actually about music. You know, intros are a thing of the past. It's basically
Right.
like, right, we got to get to the hook in like between 5 and 10 seconds. To grab their attention, you know, and somebody's not going to sit and listen to a song. And I'm like, wow, that, and not saying all people, but saying, you know, in the popular sphere, which is a good sort of, I think, barometer for how most people, or many, let's say the majority, hence popular, engage with something. And yeah, it's the same. Like I see my kids on YouTube Shorts, right? It's got to be a minute long. I'm like, what can you possibly learn in a minute? But then, to be fair, though, I see some people and I think, wow, they've gotten really good. It really forces you to refine and hone what it is you want to say and say it quickly and clearly. So, yeah, I think there's some learnings in that for us old fellas. But wanted to switch gears quickly, if you still got some time, Marcus, and just talk
Absolutely.
about the second thing here. So maybe not necessarily switch gears, but switch topics slightly. Crafting a strategic mindset. So, you've climbed up to a senior executive level. Like we said, we're at that point in our careers, not still a ways off retiring, but certainly starting to turn the corner. That crafting the strategic mindset, what is that to you?
So for me, I love being in the strategy space. It gives me the opportunity to probably lead on some of my strengths of liking to be real, liking to distill the essence of things, and be able to communicate that as a set of problems or opportunities, whatever it may be, that we want to pick up and solve. So for me, that strategic mindset is being able to see the forest from the trees quickly, honestly, and sort of in a between the eyes sort of fashion. So I think a lot of organizations are really starting to cry for it more. And I think that the brief isn't always clear, but you can kind of get a sense of someone that can come in quickly, sort of have a sniff around, understand enough about what's going on to find, hey, the problem is X. Does that sound right? Are we going to go after that or not? Are we going to consciously do something about it, or we consciously say, no, we're not going to do something about it? Is it a similar way to kind of like the startup world or idea development, like the funnel? Are we going to park the idea or do something about it at the time? But that also connects to a position of being honest about the situation and having, again, if you're sort of going back to that authenticity thread, is that if we're not honest about what problems are, or if there's a problem at all, then, what do you do to fix it? You turn it and say, hey, we're perfect today. Okay, let's stay the same. No need for me here, kind of thing. So for me, it's don't hear that very often though. It's more the opposite most of the time. But I think it's a situation where I like to see big problems. I like to make a big difference. Big challenges excite me. The excitement of unique big challenges really excites me. The ability to sort of go in and wade through mountains of information and get to that needle and haystack. There it is. That's the problem. We're going to unpick it. This is the big opportunity and do something really cool. So for me, that's what the strategic mindset's all about. It's about getting to that essence. How do you distill it? How do you pitch it in a way that, again, understanding the attention span of the general population is low? How do you distill it to be real and actually make a difference? So that's cool.
Yeah, let me ask you a question. See what you think about this. This is something I've observed, and talk generally on the podcast. I talk to people who have ideas or are problem solvers, because they're the ones who want to come on and shoot the breeze and talk about the stuff, right? So it's kind of self-selecting. But the one thing I hear a lot, which has surprised me, even in some of the biggest corporations, Fortune 150 companies that I talk to, like in the States and stuff, right at the top level, and you go, oh, we didn't really define the problem we were trying to solve. And I was like, okay. And then you put all this time and money and effort, and obviously the government does that stuff as well, right? It's like, we need to come up with a new thing. And I'm like, well, yeah, how many times has any government anywhere said, maybe Japan's an exception, but saying, okay, we're going to do this massive project and it's going to come on time, within budget, and it's going to deliver the intended benefits? And it's like, never. So I don't know. It's one of those things where I think, does crafting a strategic mindset start with curiosity and saying, what problem are we actually trying to go after here?
Absolutely, Anthony. And what you've just described there is where, and it's a very common thing. I think it's a situation where where there is a failure and there's an inability to do that, or it keeps swaying. Hey, we're solving problem A. Oh, no, we're solving problem B. No, we're solving problem
Oh,
C.
yeah, right.
No, we're solving problem
Prioritization.
Z. We're
Yeah,
solving problem 50. I actually think there's multiple causes, but a common one is groupthink, right?
Huh?
So someone goes, hey, it's problem Z, and then they've convinced someone else, hey, I think it's problem Z too. Oh, and then you sort of get a groupthink situation where everyone just agrees with each other. There's no critical distilling of what it actually is, questioning of that. And then everyone just sort of sits around a table and nods and goes, hey, it's Monday. Problem Z's the one we're going to go after. And that's why we're doing it. And then you get to Wednesday and it's problem D on Wednesday. And it's sort of like, okay, yeah, problem D is the right one. Let's go after that. So I think it can be related to that. And I think it's also a situation where the critical thinking and the critical analysis sort of goes out the window when everyone is just effectively just copying each other. I'm not intentionally linking this back to some of the things we've talked about. It's almost like that feedback thing where it's a lack of feedback too. So by being silent and just being a group and just nodding and saying, yeah, I agree with Joe or I agree with Mary. Yeah, it's exactly the same thing. Yeah, they're right. Yeah, let's go that way. I think we sort of fall into a trap of just being a passenger a lot of times. And, you know, you look over your shoulder, you keep up with the Jones, just do the same thing and you nod and smile because it's a safe thing to do or it's seen as being a safe thing to do. It's also a situation where I think a lot of organizations, in many cases, it's not bold, but there's a sense of safety of not wanting to change.
Yeah.
To do that, well, the psychology would be everything's great. Why should we change? We're as efficient as we can possibly be. Greatest product, we've got the greatest people, we're most efficient, you know, best is your customer experience, yada, yada, yada. But, and then, so to counteract that drive for change. A lot of organizations just don't want to. They say that they do, they just don't. Because it's uncertain, it's scary, it's risky. And a lot of people sort of go into situations and say, I love change, I love being transformative, I love being transformational, if it's everyone except for me. That sort of situation, that's another common one, I think, Anthony. But I think inherently when you're looking at particularly boardrooms, you know, the brief is really about managing risk, right? Managing risk and governance inherently is a defensive play. It's not an offensive play, generally speaking.
I agree, 100%. Yeah.
So this is the thing
is, I think in certain places, right, that can work for a time.
Yes.
And so, but I think the thing is, and I don't want to I will go a little bit broad philosophical, but we've got this pesky thing, at least as far as we can observe, right, called evolution. And we are moving through, as we know, space and time. So the thing is, you can't stop it. You can't stand still. It's just like, it's woven, as far as we know today, into the fabric of the universe. So, you know, you can say, well, I'm not comfortable. And you go, I get it, that fear, because it's like, well, I'd trade something for something that's working, that's something that isn't. But again, often then people think about change in terms of revolution, I think, rather than evolution. And you say, yeah, you know, if it's broadly working, what are the bits we can do around the edges that we can start to probe and test that will help us, right? Because eventually we're going to hit problems. If we stay this, and the easiest way to see this is like, how many companies in the world are still around after like 400 years? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, so, and you look at who makes up the Fortune 500, and it's completely different to what it was 30 years ago. So you say it's happening. These things are happening, whether we want to admit it or acknowledge it. But I think it does go back to, like you say, the fear thing, and people saying, I like to say I want to change because that's what everyone wants to say. But also is saying, you know, we're doing each other a disservice by not being honest. But also as well, like with the group, that often with the group thing, I'm like, yeah, if you're moving around on 4 or 5 problems, what that tells me is you're treating the symptoms. You're not dealing with the root cause. There's got to be some higher order issue going on here.
Yeah, totally. I think you're right there. And I also think that you can actually focus on multiple things. So you can kind of go, we're gonna, if you take an analogy on renovating a house, you can actually go, hey, I'm going to knock down and rebuild the rear of the house, but I'll just, dress the windows at the front. So the analogy would be you can sort of transform in parts, and you can sort of do incremental improvements along the way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think organizations just kind of need to go into it with mindset of a case for everything, and
Yeah.
then just see what stacks up along the way. It's also a situation where you've got to react to what's going on as well. Right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
there's, anyone that is successful, competitors will go after them. People will try and replicate people, and it's very flattering to replicate for others to replicate what you're doing. They're also got the intent to sort of take market share and all that sort of stuff. So I think to combat that, there's those two angles: is do what you're doing today, but better, cheaper, faster, greater customer service, etc. But
Yeah.
there's also a lens around: do we need to transform? Is there fundamentally something we need to do? Is there a massive offensive play we need to make? Is there a massive defensive play? Be it
Right.
cyber, be it something else. So I think
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a case to kind of look at everything.
Yeah,
Um,
I love that analogy, and also because I find sports analogies kind of easy to digest. But it's
yeah,
so true, right? Like here, recently, obviously we've had the Euros, and they talk about England. My son, who's 11, is a massive Arsenal fan. He's also like just football mad. You know what I mean? And I don't really understand that much about it. Being in Aussie, I played it when I was like 6 or 7 or something, but I haven't grown up with it. And anyway, he's like, oh God, England, all they do is park the bus. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, well, they're just defensive. They're always playing. And then it's like, if you're not attacking, you can't score goals. And then I was like, that's a simple analogy, but it's actually a very good point. And maybe as well, it's like, well, if you are doing those defensive plays, or you're saying, hey, we're on the defense, you know what I mean, or the protect thing for a bit, you can't be there forever, then be honest about that. And then that way people can arrange the priorities accordingly.
yeah, totally. And it also allows internal teams to play to their strengths again. So you might have those sort of hyper aggressive types. You might have those that are really aspirational, that play the offensive plays and can fail. They can miss the buzzer. You know, they can
Yeah,
do that sort of stuff, and it happens, right? But they're happy to take on that responsibility and have a crack. We just have some other folks that are comfortable with those defensive roles and passing roles and whatever it may be. So I think the skills really complement each other, and the analogy is a strong one because it's easy to understand. Again, back to that sort of junior level, like even in the schoolyards, kids grow up on soccer or football wherever
yeah,
worldwide. Not everyone understands that concept. So I think that plays out, through the large organizations, startups, etc. So it's a combination of all of the above. But also, it's also that situation of being, hey, I can't be a superstar. I can't be a superstar striker, and
yeah. And a defender
midfielder
and a
and
midfielder.
defender,
Yeah,
and play goalie as well at the same time, and all the above. And by the way, I'll play a coach as well. So
yeah.
can't really
And there's
be a
nothing
10
that's
out
going to
of
go
10 for
wrong.
everything.
I've got it all figured out. It's just going to be
Yeah, no
fine. Yeah,
weaknesses kind of thing. So, yeah, I think it's a really strong analogy.
yeah, yeah. So I suppose as we're now just rounding towards the back end, one question I would ask, because you've seen this at let's say it's a corporate level, right? Way, way, way beyond the startup level, although I think a lot of this still applies. But even at that corporate level, like in terms of what you do or what you'd recommend for companies to make sure you're building that questioning strategic mindset into things.
I think it's explicitly being open to ideas,
Okay.
and it's easier said than done because generally organizations will sort of roll out the line, but may not back it up, and may not learn from mistakes. So I think it's a situation where it needs to almost be like going back to that sort of growth mindset, being willing to learn from failure. And I think that's really critical, but also the people aspect of it. So everything, when driving any kind of change and even floating the idea of any kind of change, be it transformational, incremental, etc., there needs to be a drive and a people aspect to it. And so without a consideration of cultural elements. What does a place actually stand for? What are their core values? How is it going to change? Missing that's a really critical miss, I think, because the people will either make it successful or otherwise. So if it's a great idea, it can be refined and made even by the internal, IQ and EQ of the organization. So always having that sort of cultural journey as part of a strategy is critical for me. And stating up front, hey, we want to take the culture from here to there, and this is how we're going to do it. So missing that people lens is an area that I think a lot of organizations tend to deal with just the academic side of it, as opposed to, hey, people do business with people. We make amazing things happen. That bit's really critical for me.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think it's a state of being, and it's also being, like you say, clear on your intent, and then aligning the people around that intent is saying, okay, yeah, if we do want to move forward or we're not sure about this thing, we're going to need to ask questions, and we need to ask those questions. And even if they're uncomfortable questions, we need to ask them. Just like a doctor would a patient, you can't, like, if the patient's complaining and saying, well, I got this and I got this, like, okay, well, I need to do some sort of diagnosis, do a diagnostic process, be it via, a machine or testing or just, an examination is like, I need to work out what's wrong.
Yeah.
So, because until we actually identify that, it's going to be pretty hard to, to address it. And I think similarly, if there are, like you said, defensive elements, and that is a big board thing, right? Risk and governance, I've seen that. And it's like, well, okay, if that's all you're focused on, then that's cool. We'll just be honest about that.
Yeah,
absolutely. And then that way, like you say, we can play the players in the right position. Because it's almost like the board is like your manager in certain ways. I know the CEO is the coach, but it's like, really, it's the board in conjunction with the coach that's almost setting the formation by saying these are the things that we're trying to achieve, whether that's explicit or implicit in how we're governing and managing the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I guess sticking with the football analogy is when there is a turnover and the defenders do a great job and take the ball and you go the other direction, the key thing is everyone's streaming along and you build the momentum, and you can feel it, and it's not one attacker going forward and taking on the team. No, it's actually that entire team effort. Even the perception of having that support, having the momentum behind you is so powerful that you've got the confidence to be bolder than you would be if you were taking the opposition by yourself. There's probably some space to make a mistake. If you're uncomfortable in a situation, flick it over to someone that is on a wing somewhere.
Yeah.
That sort of situation. So you don't have to do it all on your own. It's refreshing because the weight goes off your shoulders as well. It's a joint responsibility. The goal's there. The momentum's going. We know where we're going. Let's go.
Yeah, 100%, man. Cool. All right. Well, Marcus, thank you for taking the time, man, to have such a wide-ranging discussion. I think we've been through a lot of pieces, touched on a little bit of, philosophy and psychology and sociology and corporate strategy, but it's been an absolute pleasure to hang out and chat.
Thank you so much, Anthony. It's been fun. Appreciate it.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, mate. Anytime. All right, guys, that brings us to the end of this episode of Enterprise Alchemy. As always, I'm Ant, and I will see you on the next one.